Welcome everybody. This is lesson 2 for anatomy and physiology in the muscular system unit. Today we're going to talk about a few things. The first is going to be something called muscle fatigue. Everybody has felt this, and this is something that is not new to anybody. There are actually several different types, but let's start by defining fatigue. Fatigue is simply a decreased capacity that for muscles to do their job, to move, the amount of strength that you have, and the efficiency of the performance. So I think everybody has had a point in their life where their muscles feel fatigued, and we don't always experience all three types. However, my guess is you've experienced the first two, and maybe the third one is something that is pretty rare. So we'll get into what each one of those is. So psychological fatigue, this is the most common. And basically, this is the brain, nothing else. Muscles are fully functional. Muscles have the ability to continue working, but the brain is saying they're tired, so stop. This is largely related to things like emotional state, certainly can be affected by hormones. So for example, you could feel tired. You could feel like, okay, there's no way I could get up off this couch. I'm just too exhausted. And if a tiger walked into the room, sorry for the Tiger King reference, but if a tiger walked into the room, my guess is you'd find the strength to jump up and run away. So that is something that is all related to your brain. And one of the things that endurance athletes often do is they train themselves to deal with the psychological fatigue. The idea that when your brain says, I'm too tired to continue going, you just continue going. And they fight that psychological fatigue. And it's one of the reasons why endurance athletes have that ability to just keep going, even though that their muscles are saying that they're tired. Muscular fatigue is something that is a little more difficult to get around. It is the idea that you run out of ATP. So you simply have just run out of energy within your cells. So the easiest way to describe this is the idea of going to the weight room, doing an exercise where you do, some people call it rep out, where you just do as many reps as you possibly can. And at some point, you are just simply not going to be able to lift that weight anymore, and your muscles are going to stop working. And amazingly, after you stop the exercise, within 2, 3, 4 minutes, you could do it again. And so what's happened there is in those 2 to 3 minutes, while you're resting, your ATP is being produced again inside the cells. So your muscular fatigue has gone away. Now, you're still going to have problems. Your muscles aren't going to bounce back right away and replenish all the ATP within a couple minutes, but they'll be able to actually produce some tension after that. So muscular fatigue, pretty common to display. The third type is actually very rare. It's called synaptic fatigue. And synaptic fatigue has to do with your nerves actually running to your muscle. So the best way to describe this is the idea that if you are doing rapid, repetitive motions with a muscle, and your brain is constantly sending signals and telling that muscle, contract, 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 there is a special molecule that actually sends that signal, transfers that signal from the neuron, the nerve cell, to the muscle cell. And that chemical is known as acetylcholine. It's often abbreviated as ACH, or a lot of people just call it AC. And it is that is the signal from the neuron to the muscle. And if you're constantly sending that signal, you can use up that acetylcholine. Acetylcholine is recycled, so when you send that signal, it's sort of broken down real quickly and then it's reformed later. So you typically don't run out of acetylcholine, but if you're sending that signal over and over and over again, you can run out temporarily while you're taking time to recycle that. So that is the third and by far the most rare version of it. I've only had a few people tell me that they've experienced something like that. All right, muscles and energy. So how do muscles get their energy? Most commonly, they get their energy through what's called aerobic respiration. This means that you use oxygen. So glucose, which is your main energy molecule, is completely broken down, and it is completely taken apart, and the byproduct is carbon dioxide, which is why you need to breathe out carbon dioxide. Breathe in oxygen, breathe out carbon dioxide. And generally, the rule of thumb is excuse me, that one molecule of glucose will make 38 ATP molecules. And the reason you need to constantly be burning the glucose is because the ATP molecules themselves can't last very long. So you need to actually break down the glucose. ATP has a half-life of maybe a minute inside your cells. It just does not last very long. So you need to constantly be breaking down the glucose to replenish your ATP supplies. But what happens when you start running and within 30 seconds to a minute, if it's a vigorous exercise, you've depleted the oxygen inside your cells and there's no more oxygen to break down that glucose? Well, you don't just fall over, which is good. You can continue to go. And the way that you do it is your body and your cells switch over to something called anaerobic respiration. They basically break down the glucose without the aid of oxygen. And in this case, the waste product is not carbon dioxide, it is lactic acid. And it is much less efficient. It only produces 2 ATP molecules for every glucose. And it produces lactic acid, which is a waste product. Not only is it a waste product, it can damage your muscles. So the lactic acid can build up in your muscles if you do this for an extended period of time. And that lactic acid can damage the tissue and cause soreness in muscles. It is why when you lift weights, the next day you feel a little bit sore. It's that lactic acid actually is burning there. In fact, there's even a term where people talk about after lifting weights, you can kind of see that your muscles are kind of swollen. And they literally, people call it getting swole. And that idea of you are actually creating lactic acid in the muscle, and the muscle does swell a little bit. That's temporary. It does not last, but that lactic acid being in there. And you may also have had the experience that if you run track or do certain things, that you do cool down exercises. So at the end of a vigorous exercise, you do some very moderate exercise. The idea behind that is to get oxygen pumping through those muscles and to get blood pumping through those muscles so that the lactic acid can be taken out, so the lactic acid isn't sitting on the muscle and causing that soreness. So depending on the state of which you train, this anaerobic respiration can last several minutes and possibly longer. Some people have trained themselves and they can function with sort of partial anaerobic respiration for hours. And again, endurance athletes do this, but typically endurance athletes want to try to stay aerobic because ultimately you can't go for hours and hours and hours on anaerobic respiration. Oxygen debt. So because if you are switching over to this anaerobic respiration, the lactic acid is going to build up, and eventually you're going to have to get rid of it. And the way you get rid of lactic acid is you actually burn it with oxygen, but you have to wait until oxygen is available. So people often refer to this idea as an oxygen debt. So you're borrowing oxygen from the future. You have to run right now, and then what you're going to do is you're going to breathe more oxygen in later to burn off that lactic acid. So that requires a recovery period. So when you do a long run, for example, for the next several hours, you may not even notice it, but you're probably breathing at a slightly higher rate. And that is to burn off that lactic acid that you build up. A famous case of this is the idea of marine mammals. Particularly seals are famous for this. So if you've ever seen a seal, one of the most, especially if you saw them in the wild, one of the most likely places you saw them was sitting on a rock. And people often equate these animals as being somewhat lazy, and it's not because they're lazy. What is happening is that they actually have an extremely efficient ability to go into oxygen debt. They can go because they hold their breath, and they can swim underwater and hold their breath for, I think the Weddell seal has been clocked over an hour underwater holding their breath. Don't try that at home. And these, it creates an incredible amount of lactic acid. And so if they are underwater fishing and trying to gather their food, they can come up, and at that point they actually have to burn off all their lactic acid before they can do one of those dives again. And so they have to sit on a rock. And not only that, their bodies are so efficient that things like their digestive system, they shut down while they are underwater, because in order to conserve as much oxygen as possible, they turn off things that aren't necessary. Basically, when they're swimming around, the only thing that's working is part of their brain that is designed to hunt and their swimming muscles, and that's it. So seals aren't lazy. They just need to borrow oxygen. So slow and fast twitch fibers, you may have heard of this too. So slow twitch fibers it's very difficult to tell of these unless you really know what you're doing. The slow fibers are slower to twitch. They don't move as fast, but they don't tire. So they're aerobic. They're designed for aerobic respiration. They have lots of blood supply. They have, and they store lots of oxygen inside their muscles. They're what you need for a long race, a 5K, a 10K, or something like that. Fast twitch fibers are the exact opposite. They're better at anaerobic respiration. They have huge stores of glycogen, stores of sugar, so that because you burn through it so quickly when you're going through anaerobic respiration. But these are the muscles you want for a sprint. So in humans, we have a roughly equal distribution of both. Obviously, there are some people that are designed a little differently. There are certain people that just have the ability to run forever. They probably have more slow twitch fibers. Usain Bolt probably has more fast twitch fibers. And you have, you really kind of keep them the same way most of your life. And if you exercise slow twitch fibers, they will develop. And if you exercise fast twitch fibers. So generally speaking, if you are a sprinter like Usain Bolt, you don't want to do a mile run to warm up. You want to do sprints. That's it. And likewise, if you are the winner of the Boston Marathon, you don't want to run sprints. You want to exercise those slow twitch fibers. So these are, there's kind of some unique ideas behind this for exercise and physiology here. But it's kind of interesting thing, I think. So hope you guys enjoyed this, and we'll see you soon.